topic, of course, Lag BaOmer, but particularly to explain the symbol of the symbol, as it were, the icon. Now everything has an icon, but actually it's rooted, it goes back in Judaism very far, the idea of symbols. And it goes back not just in Judaism, truth is, in all societies and religions. So the icon, as it were, of Lag BaOmer is the bow and arrow. Why is the bow and arrow the icon of Lag BaOmer? The classic reason, and this also explains why traditionally Lag BaOmer, and when I say traditionally, it's only the last few hundred years, it's not that old. We explained this the other day. It's all very new, relatively speaking. But at any rate, when I say traditionally, I mean relatively speaking. Traditionally, the bow and arrow is also connected with the children going out to the parks with the bow and arrow, over the forest, to play, a picnic, etc. In many communities, it was a day off from school, at least half a day of school, and the children would go to the parks and they would play with the bow, toy bows and arrows, of course. So the reason for that is, again, traditionally, is because, as we all know, Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the Omer. So the Omer period is a semi-mourning period because it mourns the death, the terrible plague that struck the students of the great Rabbi Akiva. 12,000 pairs of students perished during this period. Now, Lag BaOmer is the day that marks the end, or at least a hiatus in the plague. So it recalls Rabbi Akiva and his students. Now, that brings to mind, therefore, the following. The association is therefore with the following historical fact. Rabbi Akiva and his students previous students, lived under Roman occupation. At one time, the Romans forbade the study of Torah under penalty of death. And Rabbi Akiva took his students, they went out to the fields and studied Torah there in secrecy. They were prepared to be discovered by Roman soldiers. They had with them bows and arrows. If they were discovered, they'd put away the scrolls, take out the bows and arrows, and portray themselves as hunting in the forest, hunting in the field. So that's the reason historically, and again, historically, I mean, it's all relatively new, that Lag BaOmer is associated with the bow and arrow because of the association with Rabbi Akiva and his students, which is what this period is all about, and it recalls their sacrifice. Everybody knows the famous response of Rabbi Akiva when he was asked, how can he do such a thing? But he's inviting, God forbid, death by defying the Romans and teaching Torah. So you should stop doing it. So Rabbi Akiva responded with the famous parable, you all know it's one of the most famous parables in the Talmud, that a fox was by the bank of the river and the fish were scurrying to and fro to escape the nets of the fishermen. And the fox says, why don't you come here with me here on dry land? Then there you'll escape. You'll be safe from the fishermen's nets, which are only in the water. So the fish said to the fox, they say, the wisest of all creatures. Say, here in the water, we may get caught, we may die. We may not get caught and therefore survive. But if we come on dry land, vaday misa, we certainly die. So Rabbi Akiva answered the same famous response that we study Torah, we risk our lives indeed. But if we forsake Torah, then we have certainly sacrificed our lives. He meant that spiritually, also meant that physically. If Jews do not adhere to Torah, then they will disappear and assimilate, which has happened tragically throughout our history. When Torah was abandoned, Jews disappeared in one generation or the next generation. And when Jews remained held fast to Torah, they survived. That is an indisputable fact. It's the only if you look for the secret, it's not a secret, of Jewish survival, you see that wherever there was assimilation, where people abandoned Torah and wanted to become part of the greater culture, whether it's Germany or Spain or whatever, they did not survive, not spiritually, not physically either. And where Jews held fast, they survived. That's throughout our history and a very observable fact. Any non-observant, any so-called Chiloni Jew, any secular Jew is only a secular Jew because his grandparents were observant, or great-grandparents at most. That's why he is the luxury. He's saying, I'm a Jew, but I am not observant. You're only here because, in other words, if your grandparents and great-grandparents had your attitude, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be around. You would not exist. It's an observable fact of life.
My grandparents it's exactly the situation. My grandparents were both from
like everybody's were.
The whole Moabites.
Yeah, everybody. We're all here because our ancestors kept the Torah. Those that didn't, they have no children. They have no descendants. They've all assimilated. Fact. Shoin. So that's what Rabbi Akiva answered to why he is studying Torah under the risk of death. That's the only way we will survive physically and certainly spiritually. So that's the reason why we go out to the fields traditionally. Again, the last few hundred years, it's been traditional in not all communities, but in some communities, to go out on Lag BaOmer, have only a half day of study, and the children, big emphasis on children because it's the disciples of Rabbi Akiva and the bow and arrow and the fields, the parks. Clear? Now to go much deeper into the significance of the bow and arrow, which we started talking about yesterday, both in Shul in the morning and at Shalosh Shudas. And that is as follows. The essence of the reason for the celebration, Lag BaOmer. Now, the fact that the students stopped dying that day, or it's a day designated to mark the end of the plague, does not justify a celebration. When the plague is over, we're not dancing and singing and celebrating. When the shiva is over, we're not partying. So that doesn't explain why Lag BaOmer is this great simcha. So the reason why it's a great simcha, this is only revealed very, very recently to the Arizal. So we're talking, it's only 400 years old. The Arizal revealed this startling fact that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, A, died on Lag BaOmer, and B, commanded that it be a day of celebration. And that's the reason. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who was one of the greatest of, he was the greatest of Rabbi Akiva's disciples, obviously did not die in the plague. I told you yesterday the story that after the decimation of these disciples, Rabbi Akiva began anew rebuilding Judaism with 5 students, of which Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was one of them. And the greatest of them. There was Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer. And they began Judaism anew with 5 students. 5 students, he started Yiddishkeit. Spiritually, its foundations, Torah, the academy anew. At any rate, so Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was the author of the Zohar. Without repeating the whole history, the Zohar disappeared for millennia. It was discovered 600 years ago by Rabbi Moishe of Lyon. And then that created the foundation for the Kabbalah school, which the greatest exponent and teacher was the Arizal. And that laid the foundation for the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic movement, etc., all culminating in Mashiach's coming. So we find out, it is very recent, that the Arizal reveals this in his writings, recorded by his student Rabbi Chaim Vital, in the Eitz Chaim, the famous work called Eitz Chaim, that what happened Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai passed away and commanded there be a celebration. That's when it began, the celebratory component, the lighting of bonfires. Fire represents the soul, the inner dimension of Torah, the light, Zohar means light or splendor, and so on. So as you know, Lag BaOmer is celebrated therefore, in that segment of Jewry that has embraced and made the study of Kabbalah, Zohar, Hasidus part of the culture, which is basically the Sephardic world and the Hasidic world. The good news is that the non-Hasidic world, the so-called Litvische world, now they call themselves the Yeshiva world, How they hijacked that name, I don't know, but that's how they call it. Okay, it's not the hate. No one's going to argue that. By all means, call yourself what you like. But the good news is that they're embracing this too. Lag BaOmer is increasingly becoming a Yom Tov for all Jews, all Torah Jews, and that's because Hasidus is inspiring. I can use the word infiltrating, but not, because it's not undercover, although it was, and to some degree still is. But with the passage of time, it's becoming, what's the opposite of undercover? What's the opposite word? Not overcover. What is it?
Overt.
Overt. That's the good word. Overt. Now, overtly, Hasidus is being taught overtly in the various Chabad houses that are not your classic Chabad houses, but the Chabad houses that are designated to teaching Hasidus to the Torah world. They're called Beis Menachem, named after the Rebbe, and there's such Chabad houses in major cities, especially in Israel, but throughout the world. There's a very modest one here in Montreal as well, and they have shiurim classes in Hasidus attended by other Hasidim and Litvish, Yeshivish, etc., and gaining momentum tremendously as the world is seeking the inner, deeper answers, the inner dimension of Torah, as articulated in Hasidus, and particularly in Chabad Hasidus, which is profoundly deep and articulated and explained. Anyway, so the popularity, therefore, Lag BaOmer is every year it gets greater. So back to the bow and arrow. So why the bow and arrow? Why the bow and arrow, therefore, is the symbol of Lag BaOmer on a much deeper level. So the bow and arrow can appreciate was a discovery. Maybe someone figured this out, some epiphany in warfare. Till then, how was warfare conducted? It was conducted hand-to-hand, close combat. A sword, a knife, and at best a spear. But then someone discovered that the bow and arrow, now it was quite a stroke of genius, because it was the appreciation of the paradox of pulling back away from your intended target. And yet, by pulling back towards yourself, you can propel the arrow further by exploiting the tension of the string. That propels the arrow that way. Of course, that's now it's given a law and name in science. Every action is a reaction. I think that's the way it's simply defined.
Reaction is
I just said that.
An
equal opposite reaction. And that's how the rocket ship works. And that's how when you row a boat, you're propelling the boat that way. What do? You push the water this way. Pushing the water behind you, it propels you sitting in the boat that way. So it's a principle in nature, but someone discovered this, and it's a genius. The arrow, the bow and arrow, which can hit an enemy that you don't even see, hiding far. They fire these arrows. So what's the idea? As we're talking, there's two dimensions to everything overall: the external and the internal, the obvious and that which is not obvious to the naked eye. So likewise in Torah, body and soul, everything has a body and a soul. Everything has a body, the physical, external presence. And then there's the soul. There's a science, physics, quantum physics has made us really appreciate this tremendous energy in inanimate objects. The atom, split the atom and unleashes. That's the soul. That's the physical soul, as it were. That's not obvious to the naked eye. There's layers and layers and layers to this body, soul, body, soul, body, soul. It repeats endlessly. The Torah has a body and soul. The body of the Torah is the obvious dimension of Torah. The 5 books of Moses, the Talmud, the halachas, the laws, the stories. That's the body of the Torah. What's the soul of Torah? It's the Kabbalah. The soul of Torah is that these same words contain within them profound spiritual teachings and truths and energies. So in the external, it's Abram said to Sarah, please prepare bread for our guests. It's a whole, what that verse is saying is this identifying and describing different attributes within God, the chesed and malchus and all mystical, divine aspects of the divine. And the same is true of every story, of every halacha. There's the soul of it. That's what Kabbalah is. That's what Hasidus is. And for the longest time, the time had not come for this inner dimension of Torah to be accessed and revealed, and certainly not disseminated till the end of exile. That's when the process begins slowly, starting with the discovery of the Zohar, and then the Arizal, and then the Baal Shem Tov, and Chassidus, till where we're holding right now, till the Rebbe. Now, the symbol, there's many symbols to describe the external level of Torah and the inner level. External meaning the practical, the behavioral, the instructions. That's what the Gemara deals with. And within that, there's levels. It's not just all practical. There's psychological, and there's philosophical insights, but that's still all the external compared to the same words talking about the divine. So as I said before, body and soul has endless models. It's not black and white. Within each level, there's the body and soul, the body and soul, the body and soul. Continues endlessly. But in general, it's the practical and the internal. So what's the symbol? The symbol for the external level of Torah, the practical, is water. Can't live without water. You need oxygen, you need water. And that's the external level of Torah, the foundational dimension of Judaism is, here are the commandments, observe them. The halacha, the Talmud, based on the Chumash, that was given from day one, studied day one, and observed. The body of Torah, the gufa, the body of the Torah, in the words of the Zohar, are the practical teachings, and that has layers too, psychological, emotional, but all tangible stuff. Starting with the tangible, literally tangible, the physical, put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, etc. Kabbalah, the symbol of that is fire, soul, the inner dimension. It illuminates and gives warmth and vitality, etc. Now using, that's one model. Now talking about the bow and arrow. So the external dimension of Torah would be the sword, the knife, the hand-to-hand combat. Meaning to say, this is combat where your enemy is right here. You see him and you fight him. The arrow can hit the enemy that you don't even see. Looking behind the bush, there's suspicion, maybe something, or behind over some kind of impasse. So what does halacha deal with? Halacha deals with the overt resistance. What's the overt resistance? Behavior. I don't know what to do, or I don't want to do, and the person accepts upon himself halacha, the external, practical, the instructions of Torah. This is the tool by which to defeat the resistant observance, start keeping Shabbos, put on tefillin, keep kosher. It's a battle. I have to tell you, it's a battle. You don't actually wake up and we're going to observe Shabbos and not speak Lashon Hara and keep kosher and wait 6 hours. None of this comes naturally. Everything is a battle. But it's a hand-to-hand battle because you're dealing with a resistance that's practical. Here's the food. It's not kosher. Don't eat it. Finished. That's it. Hand-to-hand. That's the knife. That's the sword. Even the lance or the spear, a little bit more obtrusive, more distant, but still, I see my target, boom. So for the longest time, all we had, and we were supposed to study, the mandate was study halacha, study Gemara, study Shulchan Aruch, behave like a Jew, and no easy task. Conquer the world, if we take it further, through mitzvahs, through the performance of mitzvahs. It's all about the tangible, what you can see close up in our world, right? Hand-to-hand combat. Here's the physical world, and survive, do mitzvahs, that's the mandate. Clear? Then we get closer to Mashiach's coming, and it's not enough. Now, a new dimension to our relationship with God, our service of God, our message to the world. Now it's time, after all of this long 1,000, 2,000 years of successful hand-to-hand combat, mitzvahs, with great sacrifice. And overall, we've come through with flying colors. We're here. Now comes the time for a relationship with God, for a service of God. It's not only practical, but the mind and the heart are also engaged. Meaning, not only am I obedient to what you say and I do what you want, I understand you, a meeting of minds, a meeting of hearts, an inner relationship, understanding each other. So just like in a marriage, hit the pause button for a second, the same model. The foundation of the marriage is behave appropriately. Behave like a husband, behave like a wife. That's the foundation. But it's not the end all. It's not just your practical engagements. It's your sharing of emotion, of minds, becoming vulnerable and sharing those inner dimensions of who you are, sharing it and hearing it in your spouse with total empathy and support. That's where the deepest connection happens. Of course, if that's going on, but practically you're abusive, it's nonsense. I understand you, but I abuse you. What does this mean? That's even worse. I don't understand you and I don't behave appropriately, okay? You don't get me. But there's no excuse. Get me, don't get me. This is what I want. There's never excuse. Behavior is behavior. So for thousands of years, God said, this is what I want you to do. Do it. We worked on it and we did it and we got it down pat. That's the hand-to-hand combat. The tangible, the immediate, the that which is right before you, which you can relate to. Again, it's tangible. Before Mashiach comes, Hashem says, okay, now we're ready for this deeper relationship, to really understand the mysteries of each other, to really probe the divine mind, Hashem's divine mind, Hashem's divine emotions, the spheres, etc. All of this starts to be slowly emerging with the discovery of the Zohar, and then the Arizal, and then the Baal Shem Tov, and then the Hasidic movement. What is it all about? One mandate to reveal and inspire the inner dimension, the soul of Torah that reaches the unknown, the not tangible. It's distant. Let's get to the metaphor of the bow and arrow. The arrow touches something which you don't see in front of you, symbolic of a depth within ourself and the world that's not obvious, that's not tangible, that you can't see and physically touch. That's what the bow and arrow represents. Now, we're going to appreciate, you want to close the door there? Yeah, thank you. Whoever is here, right? So the bow and arrow, let's look at it. You're pulling the bow this way, deep within. So that the symbolism here is not just an external behavioral relationship, but deep within the heart, deep within the mind understanding, feeling. Now here's the thing, inspired with this kind of depth, the arrow, there's two symbolism here, parallel. The arrow can touch a dimension that's not obvious within the self through this deep study. But together with that, it means quite literally that you're so empowered, the Jew can go to the most distant place in the world and bring about their godliness, etc. So as I said yesterday, we'll repeat it again. I really want to get to the whole next level, which we didn't. Okay, so next week. It's worth it. As I said yesterday, what the Rabbi did, the world is astounded. The whole shlichus thing, nobody did it. For obvious reason, it's not possible. You cannot take a young couple or an old couple, doesn't matter what age they are, and put them in an environment where there's no yeshiva, where there's no infrastructure. They'll disappear. In other words, after the war, the general attitude of Orthodox Jewry was, we need to consolidate, we need to isolate and insulate, and create bastions of Torah, especially in America, coming out to the new world, the temptations are so great. And because we're accepted here, that all the doors are open, and at least then, anti-Semitism, and still, in fact, it's not like it was in Nazi Germany. There's no pogroms in America, and God willing, there won't be. Don't worry. So the melting pot accepted into public schools, universities. I mean, the responsible Jewish leaders saw that American Jewry will not survive, and it didn't. Largely, in many places, it's 60% assimilation and higher into marriage. The only way to survive is to to consolidate, to create the Lakewoods, to create the Muncies, to create the Toshes, to create these Brooklyns, the Williamsburgs, these isolated, very tight communities, and to limit our involvement with the outside world to the greatest degree possible. Only once fully entrenched, then maybe there, and that's for business purposes, but not to fraternize with non-religious Jews. No fraternization. They made their choice. That's their choice. It's tragic. Can't help them. The only way we're going to survive and ensure that our children survive is if we hold them close and tight. And the Rebbe completely was on his own. Is 1951, the first Farbrengen. Even before that, the previous Rebbe started Shlichus. And the rest of the world said, this is madness. At best, they didn't understand it, or they said that this is crazy. You cannot send a couple to a place. They'll disappear. The children will disappear. There's no family, there's no friend, no social life, nothing. And the Rebbe did it. And the truth is, even in Lubavitch was like, what's the Rebbe saying? It was a ragtag handful of survivors from the Holocaust, from Russia, from communism. Had come to Brooklyn and Chabad and a few places. We're just happy, also like everybody else, to stay tight, close, and bring up our children as Torah observant Jews. That's a huge achievement. No, the Rebbe is talking about shlichus. It took a long time for Lubavitch for the Chassidim, I'm saying, to really never worked very, very hard in ways I cannot begin to describe, and I don't know, to change our mindset. But how did he change the mindset? Just repeating the same thing. You have to go. Chassidus, that's how. He drew us in to the deep world of Kabbalah and Chassidus as explained in Chabad Chassidus, where you understand what a Jew is, you understand who you are, what a Jew is, what the world is. And you look beyond the surface, you see the depth that's not obvious. That's the arrow, the depth that isn't obvious. Divinity, godliness, a soul in every Jew. What are you afraid of, Kindalach? If you are armed with this deep understanding, it's the arrow, pull back the depth of Torah, pull back deeper. The Rebbe's discourses, my modern, the deepest secrets of God, the essence of God, as we're learning every morning here, every day, toiling, that the mind should understand these profound truths that all lead to one essential conclusion. God's the only reality. And the soul is a part of God. And everything else has no independent reality. It's only being brought into being every moment for the purpose of having a dwelling place here in this world. Easy words to say, but we explain and explore in greater depth and nuance, applying it all personally. If you're armed with that, boom, the Rebbe sends out these arrows of fire, of light, to the most distant points in the world. And the rest is history. It's all 50 years old, 70 years old. The shliach and his wife goes in and make a revolution there. They light up, they touch souls over there. The rest of the world says, how could this be done? They were right, because if you're not imbued with the essence, with Chassidus, you can't do it. You got to stay close, like the hand-to-hand combat. Boom! Fired off to Auckland, to Tasmania, to Siberia, to Hampstead. That you only can do that if you're plugged in and connected to the deepest place of Torah, which unlocks, which is what Chassidus is, which reveals the deepest place of the soul and the depth of the world, discovery of God that's within all things and hidden. All right? So that's a deeper explanation why the bow and arrow is the symbol of Lag BaOmer, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai started all this. And he was in the Zohar, the famous prophecies. In the Zohar, you can read it black and white. Elijah tells him, a time will come when your teachings will illuminate the world. And that's how Jews will go out of exile, with your work. It's in Aramaic. With your chibur, what's the Hebrew word? With your composition, with your Zohar, Yifkon b'nei Yisrael mi begalusa barachami. It's Aramaic. Jews will go out of exile barachami, with compassion. And elsewhere, Elijah tells him, Eliyahu Navi, the end of exile, children will be learning your teachings. And the end of exile, your teachings will be understood intellectually, which is a prophecy about Chabad. Chabad is about understanding mysticism, the mysteries of God. That's what Chabad is. Revolution, understanding divinity. And it's all prophesied in the Zohar. At the end of it's actually, he's even told when. It'll start in the 6th century, the 6th millennia, pinpointing the 100 years of where Chabad Hasidus began. Literally, it says all in the Zohar Parshas Noach. You can look it up. Prophecies have come to pass in our time, and they're continuing with a greater and greater impetus and momentum. So it's children on the street, and our children are learning today about soul and divine providence. These are all Zohari Kabbalistic teachings that are not there in the Talmud or in the Chumash. The whole idea of the soul and what a soul is and divine providence and so many other related spiritual profound teachings that we take for granted today. Thank God, because they've been disseminated. And everybody talks about the soul and divine providence. Even those quarters in the Torah world that will say we're not Hasidim, they have no idea, maybe they do, how it's completely transformed their own Judaism. Joy and song and divine providence and going to the mikveh and now sporting beards. All the things they said are not for us. These are all things that are born from when you understand and embrace and are imbued and inspired by the inner dimension of Torah. So that's the deeper reason for the bow and arrow. We're going to go deeper. I'm going to start it now, and God willing, come back next week for the sequel. So there's a fascinating story a sad story, but you're all familiar with it. You all know the story of King Saul, the first Jewish king, who was very jealous of his son-in-law, King David, and actually sought to eliminate him. So at one point, King David was always hoping that Saul, his father-in-law, King Shaul, would be reconciled with him. And there were moments where things were better. It was ups and downs. King Saul had mood swings. That's how we would describe it externally. So in a famous passage, and we tell this story, it's one of the Haftorah of Erev Rosh Chodesh. So every Rosh Chodesh, there would be a feast at the king's table. David wanted to know whether he should attend or not. He was in hiding. Was his father-in-law, King Saul, reconciled? So David, his closest friend, soulmate, was Jonathan, Saul's son. So they made up a sign. It's a fascinating story. Listen to the description. An indication, because David was in hiding, David the Melech wasn't king yet, the future king of Israel. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. So they made up a sign whether David would know whether or not he should attend or not. I'll just read you the translation. This is in translation of the book of Samuel. Samuel 1, Shmuel Aleph. Book of Shmuel. So Yonasan said to him, tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. And therefore you have to, you're expected to attend the Seudah, the meal at the king's table. Should you attend or not? Your presence is expected. So for 3 days, he tells him before, now tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. And you don't come. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The question whether you should attend or not and see the reaction of King Saul. The reaction will determine whether he has to remain in hiding or not. So for 3 days, You shall hide very well. You shall come to the place where you hid on the day of work, and you shall stay beside the traveler stone. There was some big traveler stone. There was an indication for travelers where they were and how far was the next city, etc. Here's the thing. So you're hiding there. This is 3 days after Rosh Chodesh, and I'm going to come there, and you're going to, through a sign, know whether King Saul is mollified, what's we're looking for, reconciled or not. Here's the thing. I, says Jonathan, I shall shoot 3 arrows to the side as though I shot at a mark. Arrows, which we're next week explain. The bow and arrow is fascinating. And behold, I shall. Let me stop this. I don't know what's going on. Yeah. Sorry, friends. And behold, I shall say to my attendant, the youth, go get the arrows. And he shoots them, and it's like, playing golf. You got your caddy that gets the arrows and brings them back. Now, you're going to listen to what I say. If I say to the youth, the Nar, the arrows are on this side, take it and come, then you know it's a sign, all is well, come back to the palace. But if I say to the youth, the arrows are beyond, he's going, and no, it's not there. The arrows have gone further. That's a sign that you're not reconciled, and the time hasn't come. You must continue hiding. God willing, next week we're going to explain who King David, the players here, King Saul, future King David, Jonathan, and why the bow and arrow. The arrows are the symbol. When it's far and inaccessible, I told to my attendant, that's a sign that things are not good. We have to wait. And if they're near at hand, the arrow which I shot, is hit the mark, close to the mark, which is why it's near. That's what the youth expected it to be close. Now, to rephrase it, I'm going to shoot. If it's distant from the mark, that means no good. If it's near the what's it called, the target, and I'll tell, and that's where the youth expects it to be, then all is good. So God willing, the bow and arrow. Already, I'm just going to tell you this. King David, of course, is Mashiach, descends from King David, the tribe of Judah. King Saul was the tribe of Benjamin. King Saul could have been Mashiach. He could have been the first king, always had this potential, and the final king, but didn't. And we'll tell you why he failed. And then we'll explain why it's going to be King David who will start the process, and it'll be his descendant, Mashiach, that completes the mission. And it's all bound up with the bow and arrow, tied into everything we said till now. So please remember it. And then we will then explain this. Otherwise, like of all the signs in the world that Jonathan is looking for to tell King David things are good and not good, in other words, if a simple question, if David is hiding, can hear Jonathan speaking, he could just slip in a word. One word. He didn't need the whole symbolism of the arrow. Say one word. Did they know what?
I don't come out, it means.
Yeah, yes, many ways to do this without this elaborate, the arrow's missing the target, close to the target. He has to use the bow and arrow in this whole symbolism because it's reflective, based on what we learned today, on are we close to redemption or not, and what's it going to take? That's the whole discussion here. If King Saul would have reconciled with King David, then that would have been redemption. They would have fused, become one, as it were, this great monarchy, and that would have been. That was not to be. It's distant. There's work to be done. You're getting a sense of it. We will explain it next week, particularly who King Saul was, who King David was and is, Chai v'Kayim, David Melech Yisrael, Chai v'Kayim, because his mission continues and culminates through his ultimate descendant, Mashiach. All right, God willing, next week.